DMDongo here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at the Priest, the Witch, and the Lost Temple. And no, that's not the start of a bad joke. So, The Priest, the Witch, and the Lost Temple by David McDonough is currently on sale in the DM's Guild for $2.95. That's American dollars. But what is it? It's an adventure for levels between 2 and 3. A party size of 4 to 5 is expected here. It's a classic tale of misdirection. You have a classic villain that is not quite everything you seem to be, and those that look like allies may begin to reveal themselves in time to be the true evil at work here. It takes place in the town of Whitehaven, although you could uplift this and move it to wherever your setting needed it to be, essentially. It's presented in 3 parts, a preamble of sorts to get players thinking and engaged with the story and the various NPCs and factions that are present in Whitehaven, a confrontation with a possible enemy in a lair, and then finally moving on to the true meat and villain of the story, dealing with it is in a large, complex encounter. There's a lot of background information here, great for DMs who love the world building aspects of things, but it may grate on those who just want to get started and get going. But I like the fact that each chapter is different. You have a town to explore, a villain to confront, and a dungeon to delve. It makes it a really nice, overarching theme. Now, what did I like about the adventure? I really like the guides that are presented, the guides on how to roleplay the various NPCs. It's a nice touch that adds a lot of meat to the adventure so that you can figure out as a dungeon master very quickly how to deal with these various NPCs and what they'll react to and how they'll kind of behave. I really love the fact that the town is very rich in history and is a gem to explore generally as both PC and DM. There are lots of factions present for DMs to run and kind of manage, which is something exciting to do as a DM from my perspective. There are lots of player choice here in the first section, and a lot of things that they could do or could not do, and people they could help or not. And the included maps that are present are a nice, simple design, especially the battle maps, the ones for areas where combat is likely to occur. I really like them. They're really easy to kind of visualize and figure out where things are. They're not overly cluttered. They remind me a lot of the Dice and Logos maps from the Dungeons of the Mad Mage and from the Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Very clean, very simple, but it allows the DM to add extra flair and flavor if they choose to do so. I really love the thematics of certain areas. The villain appearing at the last minute only to get away is kind of a really classic thing. And I love there's some really simple, interesting puzzles and traps, especially one around alignment that I really like. And while I generally don't play with alignment, I find it kind of useless or more hamstringing than guiding. It's really nice to see something where you could play off and roleplay that. It's really a cool idea. And I like the last encounter, but I like it in a very specific way, and I'll explain this. So there are 2 enemies that you come across as part of this final encounter, and both of them are engaged in combat with each other, and you come upon them just as kind of the battle is ending. Now, I would change this slightly here. I like the concept of 2 enemies fighting, and then you coming upon them, and they kind of need to decide what to do. Do they continue attacking each other? Do they attack you? It makes the combats more dynamic and more interesting just from that perspective. Speaking about that encounter, the monsters that are chosen throughout the adventure are really inspired. A lot of the monsters from this encounter come from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, so they're the more interesting, unusual, and strange creations that your players are unlikely to have seen, which means that they're more interesting. In addition to that, anytime one of these monsters is mentioned, a exchange is mentioned as well. You can use this monster instead, which is from the monster manual. While it won't turn any heads, it might give somebody a pause for thought, or might be able to so that you can still run it should you lack those books. Finally, I really like the fact that this is a very open-ended adventure. At the end of it, you have this kind of large looming questions surrounding kind of the results of the adventure. It's a really great springboard adventure to kind of branch off into a full campaign that a DM could then run from this alone. Now, what didn't I like? So, the first encounter felt very odd. It wasn't described very well, and it was very hard to figure out exactly what was supposed to be present, what creatures are present, and their motivations. There's a kind of a really strange thing that happens here where it's described as creatures with sickly pallor, but that it doesn't say what they are. They could be zombies, ghouls, or anything in between. So it'd be more, in the case where you're describing encounters, always be specific. I have 3 zombies that are going to attack this place, and this is their kind of general motivation. It's okay to be specific in those instances, because then it means that DMs don't have to do as much work in that area. A map of the town in general would be a really great help to help with the general flow about where things are. And it's great to give a handout to players as well, because they can just show, well, here's the map of the town, here's what it looks like, here's where all things are. It's a really great thing to have. There is a map of the general kind of area, but the town itself isn't really kind of described, even though the players will be spending quite a lot of time there. I estimate somewhere between the range of 2 hours probably of spending time in this town. I really love, like I mentioned, the how-to roleplay sections. I would have just really liked to see them more organized better in like a dramatis persona section, so that here's all the characters, here's how to roleplay all of them, and that way I can refer back to it should I forget anything or kind of come across a situation where I'm not entirely sure how this NPC would react. Again, kind of in that same vein, an appendix. Anytime you include a unique monsters, for instance, there are some interesting flavors on zombies, it's always a good idea to create their stat blocks and put them in an appendix as part of that. Speaking about that, I think there is some rules around the DM's Guild of what you are and aren't allowed to include. I think you can include monster stat blocks from the Monster Manual and from the other 2 books, Monokind Tome of Foe and Volo's Guide to Monsters, but don't quote me on that. I would double check on the DM's Guild rules. As also, it would really have been nice to include a way of scaling the adventure, spreading it out, making it more available to higher and lower level parties. Something so where you can just add a few monsters here or subtract a few monsters there, so that you can get this kind of like nice encounter across the whole thing. That way, for players that really want to play this encounter, because I would really like to run it, but most of my players are now beyond the level where I could feasibly use it. There's also a question of certain things in Chapter 3. Now, there's a character who comes from Fae that you meet very early on in the adventure. Now, some of the choices based around her kind of home are a little odd. She has a bust of Zaz-Tam in her home, but she's left Fae. She's been excommunicated and exiled. She's running away from there because it's a dangerous place and she never wants to go back. Why would she keep a bust of Zaz-Tam, who is the leader of Fae, the Red Wizard? Specifically, he is the Lich Destroyer, or like he is like the worst, he's the baddest of the bad in terms of Fae, and Fae is not a nice place. So why would she keep this strange thing? It seems very incongruous with her character. Finally, the other one thing that has to do with the story and general overall writing. In the last section, there is an NPC kind of event that occurs around sacrifice, and the option for players to interact with this portion of the story is never presented. It would have been nice to allow the players some player agency here so that they can contribute to this final sacrifice, and that way they feel like they have control and have contributed to part of this. It would have been just kind of like a nice to have. It's a really odd thing there to kind of like strip that away from them, just let the NPC do the work, as it were. It makes it feel like, well, what was the point of me being here if the NPCs could have done everything for me? It's a really odd thing. So, my final thoughts. I'm a little harsh on the new guide, but in general, I like what's presented here. There is a lot going for it, and for a first foray into the guild, this is a damn fine piece. A lot of problems I mention are strictly a problem with structure of an adventure, things like monster stat blocks, or perhaps adding in flowcharts. They by no means make the adventure unplayable or unfun. Now, on to my rating. So, going to go with the perk system, so PERC, so that's the 3 pillars of D&D, so combat, roleplay, exploration, and then finally a P for polish, kind of like your general catch-all for anything that really isn't necessary for the adventure to be run, but might be something that you really would like to have. So, let's start with C, combat. Combat in these low levels is kind of interesting. It's difficult to make it interesting while not making it lethal, because at lower levels, players are very squishy. They're easily killed by things like massive damage, if you're going by raw rules, or even just simply a couple of bad die rolls. Specifically, there's some encounters, though. The last encounter I really like thematically, but I think it would have been better just to leave the two combatants as fighting while you deal with them at the same time, or trying to kind of maybe get the orb away from them in some fashion. It's interesting enough of an encounter because there are multiple win conditions then. If you kill one enemy, does the other enemy now like switch sides and go, well, you've dealt with him, now I don't need to do it? Or if you kill the other one, does he now switch sides? Or do you just steal the orb from both, the MacGuffin from both of them, and now you have it, and you hightail it out of there? There's some nice, interesting mechanics around that, but as presented, it's not really an interesting encounter from that side of things. Every other encounter that's presented in it is more of like your standard affair. You see some enemies, you deal with them. You see some enemies, you fight them and deal with them. The rest, and that's kind of okay in these lower levels. So for my combat rating, I'm going to rate it 4 out of 5. Roleplay. This is where the module really shines. It's done really, really well here. There are a lot of interesting dynamics present here, and what's presented is a joy with a plethora of unique and engaging characters for your players to kind of enjoy and for a GM to kind of like role play. It's nice to have those kind of different characters, the way they act, the way they behave, and gives players a real sense that this world is really grounded. And I cannot stress how helpful it is to have that role play advice, and I really like the false scent that is thrown down very early on. So 5 out of 5. Exploration, E. The first chapter is really great here. There are a lot of areas to explore. The village is nice to kind of like go around and talk to different things and do different things and kind of branch across things. It's nice to have that kind of branching things. It's a shame that the final chapter is a bit more linear. There's kind of one path you go through and that's it. That being said, both areas are interesting in their own rights, and sometimes a good, easy, straight path is what you need to kind of get things done. I will say here that there are some inconsistencies with the layout and design of certain areas, particularly both the final spot and the second chapter mansion around characters presented. Such as the final area, the villain goes through before you, and yet there's no evidence that he's gone through. No traps sprung or creatures destroyed as a result of him passing through this place that's been abandoned for centuries. It would have been nice to see maybe skeletal bones being just destroyed and burned as this creature moves its way, this villain moves its way through. Maybe undead guardians of some kind that have been run afoul of him. Overall, I like it okay, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. Finally, P. Polish. This is where kind of work needs to be done. Maps for a module should always be included in separate files, just because the virtual tabletop crowd really needs it. It helps out. It means that we can just drag and drop, and we're not cutting things out of PDFs. In addition, there are a lot of things around general structure that can inhibit your play and implementation experience. A map or general layout of a town would really help just to figure out where things are in relation to each other. And it also is a really nice handout to give to players. And that's one of the other things. Handouts are really a must, a really nice thing to have, especially if you were trying to kind of add that extra bit of polish. The first encounter, like I mentioned, feels weird, and that's a question of structure and more around you need to be able to say what specifically is in this. Bold the monster's names, and italicize any magical items that appear. It means that they're really easy for the eye to catch out and go, well, that's a monster. That's one. It references specific monsters. Have a look at other DM's Guild titles. See what the ones that are most popular doing, so that you can kind of not straight copy, but learn from their formatting ideas so that you can take the best of everything. I would have also loved to see something to expand the playable range, and just in general. APL, average party level, is used quite frequently in several different modules to kind of do this. So you can go, well, I've got a party of 6 and they're level 4. They have an average party level of 4. They're very strong for this adventure, so I need to adjust the encounters in this way. In addition to that, I would just love to see a bit more art to break up the word blocks. There's quite a lot of, there's a couple of pages in a row where there's no art at all, and it makes it a little difficult to read and kind of keep track of things. So it would have been nice to just pepper it with a bit more art. It's okay to have those kind of things and expand your thing. I think right now it's at 45 pages long. It'd be okay to add a couple extra just so that it's easier to kind of consume. The maps here, though, I really like. I know that there's some controversy around this because, well, they look really simple. Why should they, shouldn't they be these like extravagant things, especially in like official WotC products? But the thing is I really like them. It means that if I want to, I can make my own, but I have the basic structure that means that I've got enough to get me by, as it were. And some players aren't visual learners. They're more around kind of audio, or they like the descriptions of GMs kind of telling them what the world looks like and how that behaves and everything like that. And in addition to that, in this polish section, I really love the how to roleplay sections. They're really well written, really well done. They show a great understanding of characterization and how to run NPCs. But overall here, there are so many kind of issues and niggles that I've kind of have to bump this down to 3 out of 5. Finally, so all told, if you add everything up, I would give this a 4 out of 5. I really like the adventure. Another polish pass and you have a really great starting adventure that could springboard a whole campaign. Thank you. This has been DM Dango. Thank you. This has been DM Dango. Please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe to my videos for more content. And thank you, and peace out.